Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today, we're going to do the weekend review show for September 21st through the 23rd, 2018. We will walk through the top 10 of the box office. Some of the wide releases didn't get in the top 10, so I'm still going to cover those. Life Itself came in at 11, and Assassination Nation came in at 15. Not great performances, and we will talk about why they did not do so well. And then we have some limited releases to talk about, and then maybe take a look at what's going to happen over the next few weeks. But let's dive into the top 10 here for the weekend. As always, these are weekend estimates. The Sunday is an estimate. The Friday, Saturday numbers are actuals. The actual weekend number will come out tomorrow afternoon if you are so inclined to check it out. Coming in at number one this weekend was The House with a Clock in Its Walls. This is a movie based on a 1973 novel, same name. I believe it. I don't know that much about the book. I think it's just like a YA children's book. This is Eli Roth directed, Jack Black, Kate Blanchett, a very kind of strange movie. When I saw it pop up on the schedule and watched the trailer, couldn't really figure it out. It's a children's film, but it also seems very gothic and dark at the same time, and those can be really tricky balance to pull off. But they did it. It opened up at $26.8 million for the weekend, with a per theater average, a very healthy $7,475 per theater. The budget on this was only $42 million, so it was a smaller bet by Universal. Something about this just clicked with people. And if I try to take a step back and figure out, like, why did this do so well? And so going into the fall, we were looking at, and I call this the Nerd Consensus, which was the Hollywood Stock Exchange, if you play that fantasy game, was basically saying $17 million opening weekend for this. I thought that was a very smidge low. I was thinking about $18 million that this is going to open up at, and it opens up basically at 27. So us amateurs were very wrong about this. Inside the industry, they were also wrong. They were kind of closer towards the low 20s for this opening up. And even this weekend, it was looking like 23, 24 when the Friday numbers came in. But this Saturday was so strong. It surged 47% over Friday's 7.8 million, and it did 11.5 million on Saturday alone. And so that's the reason why it has been bumped up here to the $27 million mark, essentially. And the actuals will come out tomorrow. I think it'll probably bump up to 27 million when that number does come out. So the question is, okay, what happened here? Quality-wise, the film doesn't look all that great. Eli Roth is, God, I don't know if younger people know Eli Roth like people in their like mid-30s do, because Eli Roth is one of those guys who was so big in the early 2000s that like you couldn't escape him. You know, with stuff like Cabin Fever and Hostel, he really was like the new horror director on the block who was doing very well for himself. He did Cabin Fever in 2003, Hostel in 2006. Both. What's interesting about both those films is that as a horror fan, they seem like these massive films, but when you look at the numbers, they actually didn't do insanely well. Cabin Fever opened up for 8, closed out at 21. Now inflation's involved too, but that's not adjusted for inflation. Hostel opened up at 19 and did 47. That was his biggest opening up until House with a Clock in Its Walls this weekend. Hostel 2 comes out a year later, opens up at 8, closes out at 17, closes out lower than the opening weekend of Hostel 1. And then for whatever reason, I don't know what happened with him. I think he was big into producing. He doesn't make a film after Hostel 2 until Green Inferno, which came out 3 years ago, almost to the exact day, which was, I mean, it's a cannibal movie, and it's like almost like a pseudo snuff film. Like, it's a gore fest. I enjoyed it because I'm really into horror movies, and I like to see what directors can do with stuff like that, and I love to see if there's some sort of deeper message going on behind the gore fest. With Green Inferno, not much. It's just disgusting. It's shocking. I think that's what he was going for. But it's very strange to see him go from Green Inferno He's been really active the last couple of years. He did Knock Knock with Keanu Reeves also that fall, October 2015. And then he had Death Wish, which was pushed from, I believe, late 2017 here to March 2018. And that opens up at 13, closes out at 34. Not a great performance. So he's never been a massive draw at the box office, but he did have some really great early success in horror. And he is kind of established as this... he's one of those directors who always shows up in documentaries, is always talking a lot, is very active in the horror community. And so that's where he gets this sort of stature from, I think. It's certainly not the financial performance of his films. But Universal gave him a chance to do this, and it looks like it's working out really well. The quality of the film is a little bit suspect. Rotten Tomatoes score is a 68 now. Audience score is a 52. Again, audience score on Tomatoes, take it with a grain of salt because it's really easily to hack. Cinema score for House with a Clock on Its Walls, B+, which is okay. And so the quality there is not necessarily a home run, more like a single double type situation. There's definitely some problematic aspects of the film. But does that quality really affect opening weekend all that much? It depends on what type of film it is, but in this case, probably not all that much. There hasn't been a big children's film that's come out probably since early August, so it's almost been about 9-10 weeks. Christopher Robin was the last big children's film, and that was a really morose looking film. I feel like Christopher Robin would have been really good this weekend or like early October. Early August just didn't make a whole lot of sense. And before that, it was Hotel Transylvania 3, which was 11 weeks ago. So there was just a right market for a children's film to come out. I don't know how popular the original book was, but apparently it was popular enough to get people to come out. In terms of, the budget and stuff like that, $40 million, a lot cheaper than most films like this. It looks a lot more expensive than a $40 million budget. And that's Eli Roth using his sort of the skills that he learned hemming horror films for like $1 million and making that work. Deadline basically says, that brings up the point that this weekend is usually really strong for children's films. They talk about Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, Maze Runner, Scorch Trials, all did around $30 million this weekend, the third weekend in September, even though 98% of children are still in school. So it's just one of those bizarre things that happens in September. I guess this weekend is like the children's film, family film weekend. We talked about the cinema score B+. That's okay. It's below Goosebumps, which had an A, which feels really similar to this for some reason, probably because of Jack Black. So the question is, how is this going to do in the long run? It's already way overperformed expectations. The expectation was low 20s, high teens. Children's films in general have good multipliers. I would say at least 3x its opening weekend. So then you're looking at $81 million. That's a really strong performance for this. And it's going to get Eli Roth more work, which I think is cool. Hopefully he doesn't do Green Inferno 2, because that movie was so trash. Fun trash, but definitely trash. And so I think this one's going to do pretty well. In terms of who showed up, it's going to be your typical children's audience. 44% was general audience, 19% was parents, 37% of the audience was children. Under 25, this is where it gets really confusing with these survey numbers, because if you post track and then there's cinema score, and there's all these different surveys that happen, but cinema score, I don't think they must not pull children, I think, is the issue here, because they say under 25 was only 28%. So that's what's happening. It's probably 18 to 25 is the only people that they'll pull who are actually under 25. They're not going to pull a 10-year-old. So they said under 25 was 28%, over 25 was 72%. A lot of those are parents. Females were 51% and males were 49%. Pretty typical of any movie, actually, that sort of 50-50 breakdown. I think a really good performance overall, and I think its multiplier is going to be okay. It's not going to have a 4x. Like a really good children's film, it's going to have 4x. It's just going to crush for weeks and months. That won't happen with this. It's just not good enough. The critics didn't like that much. The audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, even though it's been hacked, it's really low. The cinema score to B+, that's pretty low for a children's film. You at least expect an A-. So I'm thinking probably in the 3x range, probably closes out at $80 million. But a very good performance overall for The House with the Clock in Its Walls, and I'm happy for Eli Roth on that one. Okay, so number 2 this weekend was A Simple Favor from Lionsgate, $10.4 million. This is its second weekend, a 35% drop in its second weekend. Very good drop for this. It sits at $32.5 million so far. So this is Paul Feig, Anna Kendrick, Blake Lively, kind of social media noir-ish film. It got a big bump this weekend, I think, because Taylor Swift tweeted about it. No, she didn't. She just Snapchat story about it. Whatever. It's all the same to me. So all of her millions of fans saw that and maybe had a little bit of bump here. But a 35% drop is really good. Anything below 40, even for a film like this, which tends to have a little bit better legs, plays a little bit older in general, anything below that 40 mark is fantastic. So a 35% drop is something to be very happy about at Lionsgate for this film. Is it going to continue with those low drops? I think it will, just because it feels like a fall film. The weather's getting colder. It just has that autumn feel to it. Noir does in general. And I could see it drop 40% next weekend. The question is, where is this thing going to close out? It's at 32 now. I'm thinking at least a 3x multiplier, right? Opened up at 16, bare minimum 48, I would say. I'm thinking probably just because its opening weekend was a little bit depressed, it'll have maybe, let's say like a 3-3 multi. You're looking at like closing out at 52, which is not so bad. I can't remember what the production budget for this one was, but it couldn't have been high, maybe like 20 something. So that's a good sort of follow up on A Simple Favor. I was questioning how this is going to do in the long run, and it's actually turning out to do quite well in its subsequent weekends here. So I'll keep an eye on that one, but I expect it to close out probably just crossing over the $50 million range, which I think is a win for Lionsgate, especially because they didn't really market it all that well. And I talked about that last week. They didn't spend a lot of money. Blake Lively and Anna Kendrick obviously went all out for it, but it wasn't like a $50 million marketing spend in the domestic market. And so maybe they're a little bit lucky for this to sort of take off the way it has. And it seems more like a word of mouth movie. And I think they kind of lucked out with that, especially with Taylor Swift Snapchatting about it. Okay, so that was number 2. Number 3 was The Nun. Still sticking around, $10.2 million. 43% drop, which is super low for a horror film, even in its third weekend. Starting to lose some theaters, lost about 170 theaters this weekend. Per theater average was $2,700, almost $2,800. It has broken the $100 million barrier. The budget on this was $22 million. I think it had a pretty large marketing spend. But overall, this is a grand slam. It's almost like a grand slam basis loaded because of how terrible the film is. It's bad. It's not a good movie. 27% Rotten Tomatoes. I forget what the cinema score was, but it was terrible. C cinema score, one of the worst of the year. It's not a good product, but they marketed it correctly, and it's in this Conjuring universe. That's why I went to go see it. Because I love that universe. I'm sort of invested in that cinematic universe. I've seen all those. I've seen the Conjuring movies like 5 or 6 times each. I've seen the Annabelle movies a few times, so I'm in. And so when they said, hey, we're going to do it with The Nun, I was like a little bit suspect about how it was going to be, but like I'm going to show up. And that's what I think a lot of people, and that's sort of the advantage of having one of those cinematic universes like MCU, to a lesser extent DCEU, is that you have a built-in audience for every film that you create. Now, the problem is if you make a movie like The Nun, where it's not very good, people feel a little bit burned, and you can get away with it once or twice, but like after that, people are going to stop showing up and be like, I don't want to watch this filth. The Nun is not a good movie, and it's very lucky to do as well as it's doing. It's going to beat out Conjuring 2. It's going to beat out Annabelle Creation. It'll be the second biggest movie. I think it'll come in below The Conjuring, which I believe was in the 130s overall. And now I'm kind of interested to see the showdown between the Conjuring franchise and to see where we're at in the daily numbers. It's just over 100. Yeah, it's well past Annabelle 2, which is Annabelle Creation. Annabelle and The Conjuring 2, way past those movies. It was beating, it looks like, for like, in the first week, it was beating The Conjuring. But right around the second weekend, it started to get passed by The Conjuring in terms of daily numbers, and it's just not going to catch up at this point. The quality is too low. It's not a good enough movie to beat out The Conjuring, which I think was one of those really special horror films that really connected with people. So horror's The Nun was number 3, 10.2 million. The Predator at number 4. We talked at length about this one last weekend. I find this disaster really fascinating. A 65% drop to $8.7 million this weekend. Still in over 4,000 theaters. Per theater average is getting close to that drop dead of 2,000 at $2,100 per theater. Total take so far for The Predator is $40 million domestically. Remember, basically a $90 million budget. $120 million marketing campaign worldwide. So cut that in half, probably $60 million, $50 million alone in the United States and Canada. It's an epic disaster. And at 65%, I'm looking at the other drops. There's no drop here this weekend that is over 50% in the top 10 outside of Predator, which is way off at 65%. Now, with any normal sort of horror sci-fi film that has a big fan base, you would expect a decently hefty drop, but that would be more like 55% or maybe 60%. But if you're breaking 60, going into 65%, that's a really terrible performance in the second weekend. And so the news just gets worse and worse for The Predator. It was a mistake in a lot of different fronts. I broke it down last weekend as to what I thought happened. And the short of it is, I think ultimately the product is just so poor here. I don't think the conception was really that far off. I think they wanted to do a reboot. It's been a while. It's been 8 years since the Predators movie. So I think there was an opportunity to reboot that brought Shane Black back in. They had a really strong, interesting cast. I don't know what happened, but the product's terrible. I've seen it. It's not a good movie. It's a terrible blockbuster film. It makes zero sense. The comedy's shit. The tone's way off. The story just sucks. And so it's one of those things. If it's not a good movie, like here's the big difference between like now and 15 or 20 years ago. 20 years ago, you could get away with a movie like The Predator, and you know, its legs would get hurt a bit. Instead of doing like 3x, it would do 2.5x its opening weekend. But its opening weekend would be a ton higher because word of mouth was less important. The Rotten Tomato score didn't exist. And you could make money based on the name and the look and the poster of the film alone. And if you cut a decent trailer, you could easily open this thing at $50 million. But it's not, you know, its performance is just awful, and they're gonna lose. You know, someone insider said they're gonna lose probably $30 million on this. I think it's gonna be much higher than that. I see it more well over $50 million. I see closer to $100 million loss here. The production budget was way too high. The marketing is way too high. They bet way too much on Shane Black, even though they knew the film was bad. They knew it. They saw it in test screenings. They knew that it was a complete mess. They thought they could market their way to a win here. It doesn't work that way as much anymore as it used to. But awful performance for The Predator, 65% drop in its second weekend. Came in at number 4 this weekend. Number 5 this weekend, just like will not go away. Amazing, awesome performance. Crazy Rich Asians from Warner Brothers, $6.5 million in its 6th weekend. It feels like it's been out for like 10 months. 25% drop in its 6th weekend. So good. It's starting to lose theaters though. Lost about 600 theaters, so it's gradually sort of showing its way out the door. Per theater average was $2,300 in its sixth weekend. Total take so far $159 million for Crazy Rich Asians. This is one of the biggest stories not only of the summer but of the year. No one expected this. Nobody called this. No one. Warner Brothers, in their wildest imagination, never saw this breaking $150 million. They didn't see it happening, and so a huge surprise and a really interesting film to follow. It just goes to show you that if you market something correctly, you have a really good product, you put it on the right weekend, you have the right message surrounding the film, but also the marketing. It was like a one-to-one situation. The film has a certain sort of ideology, if you will, or a sort of perspective, and they match that in the marketing. And that is so important that you mirror that. So it just felt like a total experience. Like the film was part of a bigger, broad cultural movement, and Warner Brothers really just slammed a home run with this. Just such a good performance, and everybody involved should be proud of how well it's done. So that was number 5 this weekend. Number 6 was sorry, I always get this title terribly wrong. White Boy Rick from Studio 8, which is a Sony imprint. $5 million in the weekend, a pretty good 43% drop, not bad. Second weekend, per theater average, unfortunately, is dipping below that drop dead line of 2,000. Total take so far for White Boy Rick, I'll get it once eventually. Total take so far is $17.4 million. Really big budget for an art film like this, $29 million. That's probably a lot going to Matthew McConaughey. They just screwed up on this. It wasn't the right time to release it. I think it was too early in the Oscar season. This looks more like a late October, early November release to me, maybe even December. I think they felt like it was going to play well with the younger people, and no young people really showed up to it because it feels like an art house movie, which plays to the over 25 crowd. It looked like an art house movie. There just wasn't really a draw for people under that 25 year line. So not a great performance overall. It's not going to lose a ton of money, but it's just sort of, I think they dumped a lot of money in thinking this is going to break out, and it just did not break out. So that was number 6. Number 7 was Peppermint, which did okay this weekend. 3.7 million, 38% drop, which is a good drop. Starting to lose theaters. Unfortunately, its per theater average is pretty low. It's sitting at $1,400 per theater. In its third weekend so far, it's made $30 million off a production budget of $25 million. This one performed better than I expected, but it's not really breaking out. It'll probably end in like the $40-ish million range, which is okay. But STX, I don't know. They haven't had a hit in forever. It feels like this is their 5th or 6th flop in a row. Maybe this one isn't a flop. It's more like a middling performance. Didn't really break out, but it's not going to be a massive loss. But STX needed a real big hit, and this is not it. And so, an okay performance overall, but it just did not. I think it did as well as it possibly could. And the reason I say that is the product conception here was really flawed. Sure, you have Jennifer Gardner in a lead role. The movie itself looked terrible. It looked like there was no audience for it whatsoever. If you wrote this on a piece of paper, you'd be like, yeah, nobody wants to see that. And they went through it, and they spent millions of dollars making it. And it's like you get to the end, you see the trailer, it's like, yeah, it's still nobody wants to see this. But I guess 3 million people so far in the United States and Canada have seen it. So maybe I'm not, but it's not 10 million people, right? So I think overall it's a fine performance, but STX needed this to really do well. And it's not. I feel like STX might be in financial trouble here within a year if they can't get these mid-sized films to really take at the box office, and they haven't been able to do it. I'm just looking down the list over the last few weeks. Mile 22 is a huge flop. Happy Time Murders, huge flop. And so, I think I did this last round, but like, I'm not sure where they're going to go over the next few weeks, or a few months, I should say. They don't have anything massive coming out. So that sort of leads me to believe that like, they might already be in some trouble here. But that was, so Peppermint did okay. Fahrenheit 11.9, not so much. So coming at number 8 was Fahrenheit 11.9. This is Michael Moore's documentary about Trump and Russia and all that stuff. Came in at 3.1 million. Opened up in a massive 1,700 theaters for a documentary. Per theater average was $1,800. I gotta do a deeper dive on this one just because Fahrenheit 9/11 was one of the biggest movies when I was growing up and I was super politically active. That came out in the summer of 2004, right in the midst of that crazy election between John Kerry and George Bush. And it did massive. It was just a huge film that really changed, I think, the political landscape of this country. People were clamoring for a movie like that, and it really connected so well with the time, what was going on. That was from Lionsgate. It was a documentary. It had a production budget of $6 million. This is Fahrenheit 9/11, and it did so well. Opening weekend, it did $24 million its opening weekend. Its per theater average was $27,000 and only opened up in like 900 theaters. So it's crazy to see its sort of quote unquote sequel here do so poorly. This is on double the amount of screens. Its per theater average is $1,800 versus $27K. I mean, it's just, I feel like an idiot because I thought this thing was going to break out. We're right in the midst of this Trump thing. I don't know. Every single year that goes on, I misread the U.S. political landscape more and more. I don't understand it anymore. I don't feel a part of it anymore. I don't really understand what's going on. I had guessed this was going to do $17 million opening weekend. So I was way off. The nerds thought I was going to do $8 million this weekend. I think the industry was probably a little bit better at tracking this because they knew that the distributor here, Briar Cliff, this is their first, I think, distribution attempt. So that's what happened here. And Deadline hits it right on the head. Expanded way too much of a wide opening for this. This needed to be in like 300 theaters. Let it play for a month, get word of mouth going. People loved the movie. Cinema score of an A, 4.5 stars on Post-Track. Critics loved it with 80% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. So it's gonna have some good legs. The issue here was just the releasing strategy. They went really wide. Fahrenheit 9/11 opened up at 900 theaters. Why wouldn't you just sort of copy that success? Sure, it was 14 years ago. But you just feel like you had a blueprint for success. Why didn't you follow it? But this is, if you take a look back on Michael Moore, let's do that really quickly. He started out with Roger and Me in 1989. That was not necessarily, it was a pretty good financial success. Closed out at $6.7 million. It's $1989 though. So it was really good for out of the blue documentary. Canadian Bacon, which is a hilarious film. If you've never seen Canadian Bacon, please do. That came out in 1995. I think it's one of John Candy's last films, I want to say. Really funny movie. The big one he also did for Miramax. His real first big, I'd say, mass hit was Bowling for Columbine in 2002. And then he followed that up in 2004 with Fahrenheit 9/11, which closed out at $119 million. Then he did Sicko. So you had this run of documentaries from Bowling for Columbine, Fahrenheit 9/11, and then it starts to sort of go really south really quick with Sicko in 2007. That closes out at $24 million. Capitalism, A Love Story came out in 2009. I don't remember that one at all. $14 million total. Where to Invade Next comes out in 2016. $3.8 million. Then he does like self-release Michael Moore in Trumpland right during the election. That does $150K total. So he's never really come close to matching the success of Fahrenheit 9/11. With Fahrenheit 11/9, I don't know where it's going to go. Probably a 4x multiplier. You're looking at like 12 to 15 million. So it's actually not going to do that much more than Capitalism, A Love Story, which is really disappointing. Everybody thought this was going to do better. I thought it was going to do great. But I think more than anything, that sort of dates me because like when Fahrenheit 9/11 came out, it was just sort of like, it was massive from a political perspective. It was massive from an industry box office perspective, because the documentary had never done those rock star numbers before like that, especially on opening weekend. And this did not at all follow that. The demos on this, let's see, only 9% of the people who showed up for Fahrenheit 11/9 were under 25. I think that's your problem. Right, certainly a documentary like this is going to play older because people who are over 25 are more politically active than under. But at the same time, it just doesn't, I don't know. You need young people to be engaged. You know, people over the age of 18 can vote. And so, like, they're not engaged. They didn't show up for this. And it's sort of the typical young people don't vote story, and which is a sad story. 91% were over the age of 25 who saw this. I mean, unbelievable. Biggest demo was 52% were men over 25. 39% women over 25. So played much stronger to men, which I think is interesting. I think that's very interesting that men over 25 showed up a lot more than women over 25. That it just, Michael Moore movies, I think in the past felt like they were definitely 50-50, maybe even more like a 60-40 female to male ratio. I'm just sort of like going off my anecdotal experience with his films. So it's interesting to see that the women didn't really show up nearly as much as the men here. I don't know. Briarcliff probably fucked up the distribution and the marketing. I didn't see a ton of marketing for it. I know that he did a lot of talk shows and stuff like that, but it just didn't. It just, for whatever reason, just did not connect with people. And, you know, Deadline brings up the fact that, like, hey, you know, it's been a great year for documentaries. RPG did 14 million. Won't You Be My Neighbor did 22.6 million. Three Identical Strangers did 12 million. So there's certainly a market for these documentaries. Fahrenheit 9/11 feels like it should have been on Netflix or HBO first. Pump it out on a Sunday night, Saturday night, and I think you get a pretty big audience. And I think those services would get a really big bang for their buck with that. It didn't really feel like a big movie theater release. It certainly should not have been released in 1,700 theaters. I think at most, it said like 800, but I think even smaller. I think if you went with, like, give it 2 weeks in New York and Los Angeles, get really good word of mouth going, and then just bring to Chicago, bring to San Francisco, kind of do a roadshow thing over the next 2 months before the election, I think it could have made a fair amount of money, but I don't think it was ever going to match the 120 that Fahrenheit 9/11 made. It wasn't going to really recapture that lightning in the bottle moment, which was that film. So really disappointing performance for Michael Moore and his new documentary, coming at number 8. Let's keep the show going. Number 9 was The Meg, 2.3 million, 39% drop. Right now in its 7th weekend, The Meg has made $140 million. This one, like I've said many times in this podcast over the last 7 weeks, really good performance, but keep it in context. It cost $130 million to make, had a massive print and advertising budget. I'd even want to guess maybe 120-ish worldwide, maybe more. So despite the fact that it's performed very well, it's not going to make Warner Brothers like $200 million in profit or $300 million. I don't see that happening. It is going to be a win for them, and more than anything, a big sigh of relief that they avoided the massive flop, which everybody was predicting it to be. Number 10 was Searching, still sticking around, 2.1 million, a 31% drop, which is a great drop. I guess the second lowest drop in the top 10. The lowest drop was Crazy Rich Asians. Total take so far for Searching, $23 million, not bad. I did think it was going to break out a lot more than this, and it did not. But if you haven't seen it, it's a very good movie. It's kind of the social media noir thriller type, which is becoming a whole genre now. But a very good, I think a decent performance for Searching. I think Sony Gem will be pretty happy with it, but I was hoping it would make it like $50 million or something like that, and that did not happen. Okay, so that is the top 10 for this weekend. Let's talk a little bit about some movies that were not in the top 10. And they will be, they're not really that surprising they did this poorly, but I'm kind of blown away by how bad both of them did. First up at number 11, just missed the top 10, Life Itself. Okay, so this is an Amazon Studios release. It's got Oscar Isaac, Olivia Wilde, and The story here is that Amazon bought this up for about $10 million. It was already made. They saw it, I think, at Sundance or something like that, one of the film festivals. It was basically like, we're going to buy this for $10 million and put it out, which is a good sign. They really liked it. It's from the creator of This Is Us, which is a big TV show, has the same style, very sort of overwrought, very emotional in your face style to it. It's meant to sort of pull at your emotions and make you cry, I think essentially is what the purpose of this film is. And something went really haywire. I'm not sure what happened, but I don't think they picked a release date until only the last few weeks. That's what it felt like. I could be wrong on that. But it didn't feel like it had a set release date until like the end of the summer. And so they decided to put it out this weekend. They had a lot of advertising for it, a ton of advertising. So the marketing quantity was fine here, especially for a movie of this size. I think they really did their job in buying up ad space on TV, on online, everywhere. So that wasn't really the issue. The marketing quality, I think for what the film was, I thought the marketing was really good. I thought the trailer was well cut. It was a little long, but it was well cut, and I think gave a really accurate description of the film. The problem, I think, is that the film itself I think it cuts two ways. I think if you're a critic, a professional film critic and an art critic, or have ever studied art criticism in the past, and you see this movie, you are going to react with vitriol and a caustic hatred of it. And that's what happened. Professional film reviewers, people who do this for a living, who see a lot of films, they saw it and said, it's one of the worst movies we've ever seen. They gave it a 13% on Rotten Tomatoes, one of the worst scores ever for a wide release film. Average rating was 3.6 out of 10 from these critics. Nobody liked this. None of these critics liked it at all. It has one of those styles that is so cheap in terms of its emotional sort of, it's attempting to be emotionally deep, but it's just like almost like a commercial for human emotions. It's very strange. I saw the trailer and I was like, you couldn't pay me $1,000 to see this movie. That's not true. You could, but I'd just go see it to see the train wreck that it is. And you can tell that from the style immediately. It just has that style, same as this guy's TV show, whatever it is. This Is Us, I think. It's just, and this is really funny, right? So like on TV, on like ABC, whatever, it's on a broadcast channel. On TV, I think that style works because it's a different type of audience. It's a different type of viewing experience. There's less involved. There's less to live up to when you're on a TV show on a Thursday night on ABC. That's just the way it is. It's just the art form of TV. It's more consumable. It's more passive. Now, when you go to the movie theater, you're more engaged. There's a bigger level that you have to hit. There's a pedestal that you have to get up on in order to be a good film that you don't have to on broadcast TV. Now, like HBO and FX, well, FX not really, AMC maybe, Showtime, that has changed a lot where TV has become artistically, and Netflix especially, TV has become artistically closer and closer to the high level of film, but it's not there yet. And I think his TV show is not anywhere close to like the best peak or prestige TV. It kind of seems like a copy of a copy of a copy. And I think when he presented that same sort of product in a film environment, the critics just smell this. It's blood in the water. And it's a feeding frenzy of negative criticism about this movie. I'm not saying that it's right or it's wrong. I'm just saying that like this product doesn't really belong in a film environment. This is more something that this is more of a direct to streaming thing. And I'm not making a judgment value necessarily on its worth because people love the TV show. I'm sure a lot of people that showed up to see this movie really liked it. They got a B+ cinema score. And so people that did go out to see it enjoyed it. It just does not really have a place at the movie theater. It's more of a Netflix original movie would have been a really good place for this, or even just Amazon Prime Video exclusive would have been great for a movie like this. I don't know why Amazon decided to push it out in the theaters. Maybe they were looking for award contention, but obviously they should have known that critics were going to hate this. So it opened up at $2.1 million in 2,600 theaters. They pushed this out in. Its per theater average, I believe, is top 10 worst all time. $800 per theater in its opening weekend, which is an absolute disaster. Although Assassination Nation actually gives it a run for its money on less theaters, though. So Life Itself it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. And I think it, more than anything, I could really talk about this movie for a long time because it brings up so many different issues. The divide between TV art and film art, broadcast TV art, and sort of prestige cable art or Netflix. Like, there's different levels and qualities and types of art that people consume, and there's expectations with each one. This runs against all film expectations. And why is that? Because it's not subtle and it's not nuanced. That's why. You can tell from the trailer, it's insanely in your face. It's really wide openly emotionally manipulative, which is not it. Again, it's not a bad thing. I watch Lifetime movies. They're fun to watch. They're interesting, but I wouldn't go to the movie theater to watch a Lifetime movie because I expect something more. I expect something more culturally rich. I expect something that is artistically more complex. I don't expect clear answers when I see a film. I expect moral grayness and confusion. All the while it, woven into a really interesting story. And that's not what this is. It's like a TV show presented as a film, and that's why critics hated it. And I said the cinema score was a B+, but I'm pretty sure the post-track score was like really low, 47% definite recommend, which is atrocious. So there's some conflicting messages even among 2.5 stars from the post-track audience. So there's a conflicting message between Cinema Score and then the other surveys. Cinema Score says it's okay. Post-track says no, people hated this. So what's there to say about it? It's going nowhere. It was a mistake to release this in theaters. It's one of the worst performances of the year, one of the worst performances ever of a wide release film. And I have to blame. There may have been a way for this to do well if Amazon wasn't handling it, or Amazon handled it in a different way. Amazon just doesn't get it right now. They're an upstart. They think that because they have billions of dollars, they can come into the industry and just change everything and make it better. That doesn't work that way, right? There's traditions involved. There's just different aspects about releasing films and distribution which they do not understand. And clearly they don't understand, because they pumped this out on 2,600 theaters. Like, what was the thought process there? The most you could do this for Life Itself, open it in New York, Los Angeles for a couple of weeks, just see how it does. And if it does okay, then figure out a way to expand it. If it doesn't do okay, say, okay, we tried. It's not going to play, so let's get it up on Amazon Prime Video and, do an exclusive in December or November or something like that. They just, I don't know, they've really fumbled this entire thing. And it's a total disaster, and it's an interesting disaster nonetheless. It just goes to show you that you look at Briarcliff trying to release Fahrenheit 11.9. You look at Life Itself. You look at Assassination coming in at 15. You have these upstart distribution and studios. Even though Amazon is worth $100 billion, it doesn't matter, because you have to understand the nuances of distribution and the film business to do well in it. And these attempts that people are making are not working. Speaking of Assassination Nation, 15th place from Neon. Love Neon. They're doing really interesting stuff. This movie looks really fascinating, but it just, I don't know, maybe they didn't market it appropriately. I'm not really sure. It opened up to $1 million on 1,400 theaters. Per theater average was lower than Life Itself. It was $733, which I think is also obviously in the top 10 worst all time for over 1,000 theater opening. They screwed this one up. I don't know what they were thinking with this. The marketing wasn't there. Just like Life Itself, they paid $10 million for this movie. I think they got it right out of Sundance. They're trying to, Deadline basically saying they're trying to copy Blumhouse's Blumhouse Tilt, or whatever the fuck their imprint is called. it just didn't work. Like, I think they were looking for like a $5 million opening for this, and it wasn't even close. And you do have to wonder. Deadline also calls out that they decided to do a wide release versus a platform release. Platform release is like an art house release, small and you grow, as opposed to just going wide right away. They talk about this related to the Orchids put out American Animals wide as well. Didn't really do that well. So, I mean, we have a huge example here of 3 movies that are essentially should be platform releases that were pushed wide. I don't know why they were pushed wide. It just does not work. I talked about this at length last fall during the Oscar race, that like you cannot push out a movie to over 2,000 theaters without building up an audience, either through spending tens of millions in marketing on TV and online ads, or through word of mouth by doing a platform release. And they think that they can just throw this thing in 2,500 theaters and it's going to do well. That's not going to happen. That's not how the business works. And so we have 3 big failures here: Fahrenheit 11/9, Life Itself, and Assassination Nation, which I think all failed for the same reason. It's just the not enough marketing in the right way with a wide release instead of a platform release. So that's the big lesson for today. Speaking of platform releases, there are a few movies out that came out that I think are doing it appropriately, and also from sort of upstart distribution and production studios. Annapurna put out The Sisters Brothers, which came out in 4 theaters, which is probably New York, Los Angeles, typical platform release. I did $30K per theater, which is pretty good. Are they going to break out? Probably not. If it was $60-70K per theater, it has a chance to break out. Anything above that has a really good chance to break out. Didn't happen here with The Sisters Brothers. Colette from Bleecker Street did $39K per theater. Again, decent performance. It's going to play well in the big cities. That's the Keira Knightley film that did really good in Sundance, from what I remember. So smart platform releases here, over $30K per theater. Maybe let it play for a couple weeks, expand to big cities. If it doesn't do well, pull it and let it go away, let it go to VOD and streaming or whatever. These, to me, despite the fact they're only making 150K-ish, are wins, as opposed to Assassination Nation, Life Itself, and Fahrenheit 11/9 are big losses because they went big and came home with next to nothing. Colette and The Sisters Brothers from Annapurna and Bleecker Street, respectively, are aiming in the right spot. They know that they can hit and be somewhat successful, and that success will breed itself later or expand on VOD, streaming, and TV platforms. Now, because like a Fahrenheit 11/9, it's like it opens terribly. Is HBO really gonna be excited to buy it? Probably not. Colette, though, doing really well in New York, Los Angeles, probably does well in San Francisco, Chicago, Houston, maybe. And then HBO comes calling in a few months from now, and it's like, yeah, this did really well. It hits our demographics well. Let's pay $1 million for it or whatever. So that's sort of my quick take on all of that. So the big takeaway is, aim your sights on success that is achievable with distribution. I think that's as simple as you can get it. Assassination Nation should have opened on 200, 300 theaters. Life Itself should never been above 500 theaters, maybe even lower. Fahrenheit 11/9 should have opened in New York, Los Angeles, or any sort of politically active liberal places. Get that audience going, get the word of mouth going, and then expand it as needed. I think Colette and The Sisters Brothers really had the right idea here. Okay, so that's all I'm going to talk about for this top 10. This top 30, I guess, whatever. Let's talk a little bit quickly about what's coming out over the weekend or next week. Hellfest comes out next weekend. Little Women, Night School, and Smallfoot. Hellfest is not going to do well at all, I don't think. Little Women has an interesting 600 theater release. I'd keep my eye on that one. It's got an interesting cast. I don't know about the quality of it, though. So if it's not great, obviously it's not going to go anywhere. I think Night School is going to be massive. The more I think about that one, the more I see it doing quite well. I had Night School listed at $23 million opening. The nerds at the beginning of the fall said 19. I think it could be 25, 30 easily now, just the way the fall has played out. Smallfoot opening up on 4,000 plus theaters. I guess that'll do quite well. I didn't think it was going to do all that well. I had it listed at 18. The nerd said 23. If it's opening that wide, though, it has a better chance of doing higher than those numbers. But I don't know what the quality of that one either. I don't see it on Rotten Tomatoes yet, do I? No. Oh, 69% Rotten Tomatoes so far, on only 13 reviews. So that's actually not good, though. 4 rotten out of 13 total reviews. So the quality there is probably going to be suspect. But and The House with the Clock on Its Walls did well this weekend, so it soaked up the family audience. So Smallfoot, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about if that's going to do well. I think Night School is going to win the weekend next weekend. Then we have a big weekend coming up. October 5th, we have A Star is Born and Venom. I think Venom is going to underperform pretty viciously. The expectation there was in the 50s going into the fall. I said 45. It could be lower than that. The last trailer was terrible. The more I hear about it, the more it sounds like it's a complete mess of a film. So I don't think it's going to do all that well. It's definitely not going to break out, I don't think. A Star is Born is going to break out, is going to be massive. I have no clue what that's going to open at. It's going wide. I don't have a theater count for that one yet. Earlier this fall, I was saying like $17 million. The nerds were saying 24 million. I think it's going to like blast open at like 40 million at least now. It was just one of those films where we didn't know anything at the beginning of the fall, and then Toronto and Venice happened, and that just changed the entire narrative around that movie. After that, you got First Man coming out. You got Goosebumps 2, Bad Times at El Royale. I think First Man's really going to break out, and then we get to Halloween, which I was not super keen on it doing well. I thought, for some reason, people thought on Hollywood Stock Exchange it was not going to open high at all. They had it opening at 13. It had to be like an error or something. I had to recheck it like 10 times. I think it's going to open up at like at least 30. Now, with the performance of The Nun doing well early in September, this is going to be... You got Hellfest coming out. I think that's really the only really traditional horror films so far this fall season. I feel like Halloween's going to break out massively now. I feel like $40-50 million is definitely doable. And so we'll see how that one plays out. But I think that is going to be one of the big winners of the fall. Despite whatever quality it is, I just think it's the right character. Really what it comes down to me is the performance of the fall so far. I think the Predator bombing the way it did has changed the feeling a lot. Because I had thought Predator was going to do well and it was going to ride out the next month or so, making a fair amount of money. The fact that it didn't means there's a lot of money out there to pick up, a lot of audience to pick up, and potential ticket sales. And I feel like a lot of that's going to get shifted to movies like maybe even First Man or Night School or Halloween. I think a lot of that business is going to shift over to those movies. In any event, thanks for listening, guys. This is the Wildline Podcast. I will be back.